The police sirens wailed through the afternoon air as Karen stood triumphant beside what she claimed was her pool, pointing an accusatory finger at the real homeowner. But when the officers pulled up those property records and saw the truth written, in black and white, her smug smile crumbled like a house of cards. What happened next would expose not just a lie, but a web of deception that had been months in the making, and the stunning revelation that would leave everyone questioning who the real victim was. Sarah had just pulled into her driveway after a grueling 12-hour shift at the hospital, her scrubs still damp with sweat, her mind foggy with exhaustion. All she wanted was to slip into her pool and let the cool water wash away another day of saving lives, while her own seemed to slip through her fingers like sand. But there she was, a woman in her 50s with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a designer sundress that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment, standing beside the infinity pool that Sarah had spent 3 years saving for, talking animatedly on her phone. "Yes, I know it's short notice," the woman was saying, her voice carrying the entitled tone of someone who'd never been told no. "But I need the pool service here by tomorrow morning. The Hendersons' barbecue is this weekend, and I simply cannot have them see it looking like this." Sarah stood frozen at her back door, keys still in her hand. The woman, Karen, she'd later learn, was gesturing toward the pool as if she owned it, pointing out imaginary flaws in the crystal-clear water that Sarah had meticulously maintained herself. "Excuse me?" Sarah called out, stepping onto the patio. Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended, weakened by confusion and disbelief. Karen looked up, and for a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe even guilt. But it vanished so quickly that Sarah wondered if she'd imagined it. "Oh, hello there," Karen said, ending her phone call with a sharp tap. "You must be the new pool service. I have to say your uniform is interesting." She looked Sarah up and down, taking in the hospital scrubs with obvious disdain. "I'm not the pool service," Sarah said, finding her voice. "I'm the homeowner. This is my house, my pool. What are you doing here?" Karen's laugh was like breaking glass. "I'm sorry." "What? Your house?" She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what looked like real estate photos. No, there's been some sort of misunderstanding. I purchased this property last month. 1247 Oakwood Drive, right?" Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "This is 1247 Oakwood Drive, but I've lived here for 5 years. I have the deed, the mortgage papers." "Well, so do I." Karen's voice had taken on a sharp edge. "And I'm telling you, I bought this house fair and square. Perhaps you're confused about the address?" The surreal conversation continued for another 10 minutes, neither woman backing down. Karen produced official-looking documents from her purse, papers that Sarah couldn't read from a distance, but that looked disturbingly legitimate. Sarah's own proof was inside the house, locked in her, fire-safe. But the very idea that she'd need to prove she owned her own home felt like stepping into an alternate reality. "Look," Karen said finally, her tone shifting to something that might have passed for reasonable if not for the cold calculation in her eyes. "I understand this is confusing, but I have a very important social event this weekend, and I need access to my pool. I'm sure we can work this out through the proper channels next week." "Your pool?" Sarah's voice rose. "Lady, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but you need to leave my property right now." "Scam?" Karen's face flushed red. "How dare you? I'll have you know that I am a respected member of this community. I chair the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association. I organize the annual charity gala, and my husband is a partner at Whitfield, Barnes & Associates. I don't need to scam anyone for anything." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Whitfield, Barnes & Associates, the law firm that had been handling her mortgage modification, the one she'd been working with for months, to avoid foreclosure after her husband's death and the mountain of medical bills that followed. "Whitfield," Sarah repeated, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. "Your husband is Richard Whitfield." Karen's smile was sharp as a blade. "Yes, he is. And I see you recognize the name. Good. Then you understand that this isn't some scheme or mistake. I have very powerful resources at my disposal, and I always get what I want. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, the careful life she'd rebuilt after losing everything starting to crumble again. But she also felt something else rising in her chest, a fury that burned hotter than her exhaustion, brighter than her fear. "Get off my property," Sarah said quietly. "Now." "I don't think so." Karen settled into one of Sarah's patio chairs, crossing her legs with deliberate casualness. "You see, dear, possession is 9/10 of the law, and right now, I'm in possession. You can call whoever you'd like, the police, your lawyers, the Pope himself. But until this gets sorted out, I'll be right here, enjoying my pool." Sarah stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked back into her house. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's someone trespassing on my property," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "She's refusing to leave, and she's claiming she owns my house." 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived, a young Hispanic officer named Rodriguez and an older white officer whose nameplate read Thompson. Sarah met them at the front door, her property deed and mortgage papers clutched in her hands like a lifeline. "Ma'am, we understand you have a trespassing situation?" Officer Rodriguez asked. "Yes, there's a woman in my backyard claiming she owns my house and my pool. She's refusing to leave." The officers followed Sarah through the house and out to the patio, where Karen was now lounging in a poolside chair, sipping what appeared to be a glass of wine that she'd somehow procured from God knows where. "Officers!" Karen called out brightly, not bothering to stand. "Thank goodness you're here! This woman is trying to kick me out of my own home!" Officer Thompson looked between the 2 women. "Ma'am, can you provide some identification and proof of ownership?" Karen reached into her designer purse and pulled out a driver's license and a thick folder of papers. "Karen Whitfield, and here are my purchase documents. As you can see, everything is perfectly legitimate." Sarah stepped forward with her own papers. "I'm Sarah Martinez, and this is my deed. I've lived here for 5 years. I can show you mail, utility bills, my mortgage statements." "Forged," Karen said smoothly. "I'm afraid this poor woman has some sort of mental health issue. My husband deals with cases like this all the time, people who become obsessed with properties they can't afford and create elaborate fantasies about owning them." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. That's completely insane. Officer, you can check the records. Call the city assessor's office, the mortgage company, anyone. "We will," Officer Rodriguez assured her. "But this is going to take some time to sort out. In the meantime, nobody should be using the property until we can determine the legitimate owner." "I'm afraid that's not acceptable," Karen said, her voice hardening. "I have guests coming this weekend, and I will not be denied access to my own property because of this woman's delusions." Officer Thompson was studying the documents from both women, his brow furrowed. "These papers, they both look legitimate, but they can't both be." "Right! Of course they can't!" Karen snapped. "Mine are real. Hers are obvious forgeries. I mean, look at her. Does she look like she could afford a house like this?" The casual cruelty of the comment hit Sarah like a slap. She looked down at her hospital scrubs, at her scuffed sneakers, and the ink stain on her pocket from a leaking pen. She thought of her empty savings account, the second mortgage she'd taken out to pay for her husband's cancer treatments, the months of 60-hour weeks just to keep the lights on. "My financial situation has nothing to do with anything," Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger. "I work as a nurse. I save lives. I bought this house with my husband before he died, and I've been paying the mortgage ever since." "Oh, how convenient," Karen said with mock sympathy. "The dead husband story. Very touching. I suppose he can't verify your claims now, can he?" Something snapped inside Sarah. She took a step toward Karen, her hands clenched into fists. "You don't get to talk about my husband. You don't get to come into my home and—" Ma'am, I need you to step back, Officer Thompson said sharply, moving between them. Don't you see what she's doing? Sarah pleaded. She's trying to steal my house. Her husband is Richard Whitfield, the lawyer who's been handling my mortgage modification. This is some kind of elaborate scheme. That's quite an accusation, Officer Rodriguez said carefully. Can you prove any connection between this situation and your mortgage proceedings? Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. How could she prove something like that? It sounded paranoid, crazy, even to her own ears. But the timing, the coincidence, the smug certainty in Karen's eyes, it all felt too calculated to be random. I need to make some calls, she said finally. I need to verify these documents, check with the county recorder's office, contact my mortgage. Dorothy Chen arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a recorder that looked far more professional than Sarah's little device. She was a compact woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Sarah's living room as she settled into the couch. Before we start, Dorothy said, handing Sarah one of the coffees, I want you to understand something. What you're describing, if it's true, isn't just fraud. It's part of a systematic operation that's been going on for at least 2 years. You're not their first victim. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the coffee. How many others? 17 that I've been able to document so far. All single women, all in financial distress, all working with Whitfield, Barnes & Associates. For mortgage modifications that mysteriously failed at the last minute. Dorothy pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. Properties that ended up being purchased at foreclosure auctions by shell companies connected to Richard Whitfield's associates. The room seemed to tilt around Sarah. 17 women. Nurses, teachers, retail workers. Women whose husbands died or left them with debt. Women who worked double shifts and sold everything they owned trying to keep their homes. Dorothy's voice was quiet, professional, but Sarah could hear the anger underneath. The Whitfields have been running this scam with surgical precision. Through the window, Sarah could see Karen setting up what looked like an elaborate breakfast spread by the pool. Even from a distance, she could tell it was expensive. Fresh flowers, fine china, the kind of display meant to impress important guests. She's having people over, Sarah murmured. Dorothy followed her gaze. The Hendersons' barbecue she mentioned yesterday. I did some digging. Thomas Henderson is the chief of police, and his wife Margaret sits on the city council. Very convenient friends to have when you're running a criminal enterprise. Criminal enterprise? Sarah repeated. The words felt surreal. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been picking up an extra shift to cover the electric bill. Now she was apparently a witness to organized crime. Sarah, I need you to understand the stakes here. The recordings you have are crucial evidence, but they're also dangerous. These people have destroyed lives to keep their operation quiet. Dorothy leaned forward, her expression intense. Are you prepared for what comes next? Because once we air this story, there's no going back. They'll come at you with everything they have. Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Richard Whitfield's office. Dorothy nodded toward the phone. Answer it. Keep him talking. Sarah hit the speaker button, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Sarah. Richard's voice filled the room, smoother than ever. I hope you've had time to reconsider your position. My wife mentioned you had some concerns about the legitimacy of our transaction. Your transaction, Sarah said carefully, involving the house I still legally own? Dorothy was already recording, her professional equipment capturing every nuance of Richard's voice. Sarah, I'm trying to help you here, but you're making it very difficult. My wife could have you arrested for trespassing right now. She could. Have you charged with harassment, with making terroristic threats? Terroristic threats? Sarah's voice rose. I never threatened anyone. Karen felt very intimidated by your behavior yesterday. A woman of her standing, being menaced by someone in your situation. The police would take that very seriously. Dorothy was taking rapid notes, her pen flying across the page. "Richard," Sarah said, forcing her voice to remain calm, "I have documentation of every conversation we've had about my mortgage modification, every fee I paid, every promise you made, every timeline you gave me. How do you explain the discrepancy between what you told me and what actually happened?" There was a pause. When Richard spoke again, his tone had shifted, become harder. "Sarah, I think you're confused about the nature of our attorney-client relationship. I provided legal services, but I never guaranteed any particular outcome. If you're suggesting some kind of professional misconduct, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Facts can be interpreted many different ways depending on who's doing the interpreting, and judges tend to believe lawyers over other people." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. "Now, I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. Karen is willing to give you 60 days to vacate the property, plus a small relocation stipend, $5,000 cash." Dorothy's eyebrows shot up. She scribbled something on her notepad and held it up. "They're scared." $5,000, Sarah repeated. "For the house I've lived in for 5 years that I've put $40,000 in improvements into, that's worth $200,000 on today's market." "For a house that no longer belongs to you," Richard corrected. "A house that you lost due to your own financial irresponsibility. We're offering you a gift, Sarah. A chance to walk away with something instead of nothing." Through the window, Sarah could see guests beginning to arrive at Karen's party. Men in expensive suits, women in designer dresses, the kind of people who belonged to country clubs and charity boards and never worried about mortgage payments. "What if I refuse your generous offer?" Sarah asked. "Then we proceed through legal channels. And Sarah, I have to warn you, litigation can be very expensive, very time-consuming, very public." His voice dropped. "A person's reputation, their employment prospects, their future opportunities, all of that can be affected by prolonged legal proceedings." Dorothy was writing furiously now, her face flushed with excitement. This was better than she'd hoped for. "Are you threatening me, Richard? I'm advising you. As your former attorney, I feel obligated to point out the realities of your situation. You're a single woman with limited resources going up against people with significant means and connections. The smart play here is to take what's being offered and move on with your life." "And if I don't take the smart play?" Richard's laugh was cold. "Then you'll discover just how difficult life can become for someone who makes the wrong enemies." The line went dead. Sarah looked at Dorothy, who was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. "Did you get all that?" "Every word. And Sarah, this is even better than I hoped. He just made explicit threats on a recorded line, admitted to having the power to destroy your reputation and employment prospects, and essentially confessed to orchestrating the whole scheme." Dorothy packed up her equipment with practiced efficiency. "I need to get this to my producer immediately. We can have this story on the air tonight." "Tonight?" Sarah's stomach lurched. "Is that enough time to—" "Sarah, trust me. I've been building this story for months. Your recordings are the missing piece that ties everything together. By tonight, everyone in the city is going to know what the Whitfields have been doing." Outside, the party was in full swing. Sarah could see Karen holding court by the pool, gesticulating dramatically as she told some story to a group of laughing women. Chief Henderson was there, along with several other men Sarah recognized as city officials. They were all drinking champagne and eating expensive hors d'oeuvres, celebrating another successful conquest. "Dorothy," Sarah said suddenly, "how many people do you think are at that party?" "Looks like about 30. "Why?" "Because I think Karen is about to have a very public breakdown." Dorothy followed Sarah's gaze and grinned. "You're thinking what I'm thinking, aren't you?" "That depends. Are you thinking we should deliver some news that might spoil the party?" "Sarah Martinez," Dorothy said, shouldering her camera bag, "I think you and I are going to get along just fine." 20 minutes later, Dorothy's news van pulled up in front of Sarah's house. The reaction from the party guests was immediate. Conversation stopped, heads turned, and Sarah could see Karen's face go white even from a distance. Dorothy and her cameraman set up on the front lawn, just far enough from the property line to be legal, but close enough that every word would carry to the backyard. Sarah stood beside her, wearing her best dress and holding a folder of documents. This is Dorothy Chen, Channel 7 News, reporting from Oakwood Hills, where we've uncovered what appears to be a systematic foreclosure fraud scheme involving prominent attorney Richard Whitfield and his wife Karen. Dorothy's voice was clear and professional, carrying across the suburban silence. We're here with Sarah Martinez, whose home was allegedly stolen through an elaborate legal manipulation designed to transfer properties from vulnerable homeowners to wealthy investors. Sarah could see the party guests gathering at the edge of the patio, straining to hear. Chief Henderson had his phone out, probably trying to call someone who could shut this down. "Mrs. Martinez," Dorothy continued, "can you tell us how this scheme worked?" Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. She told the story methodically, clearly, hitting every detail. The months of false hope, the mysterious application denials, Karen's sudden appearance with fraudulent paperwork. She played excerpts. From her recordings, Richard's voice carrying across the neighborhood like a confession broadcast from a loudspeaker. Behind the news crew, neighbors began to emerge from their houses. Sarah recognized several faces from the grocery store, from her morning jogs, from 5 years of living in this community. They stood on their lawns and driveways, listening to the story of systematic theft happening in their own backyard. "We've confirmed that at—" Richard Whitfield's voice was smooth as aged whiskey when he called back, but Sarah could hear the tension underneath, like a wire stretched too tight, ready to snap. "Mrs. Martinez," he said, and there was something in the way he pronounced her name that made her skin crawl. "I understand there's been some confusion regarding your property situation." Sarah paced her kitchen, staring out the window at Karen, who was now doing lazy backstroke laps in the pool. "Confusion? Your wife is in my backyard claiming she owns my house. The same house you've been helping me keep through mortgage modification for the past 6 months. Yes. Well, that's actually what I wanted to discuss with you." Richard's tone shifted, becoming almost paternal. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah? I'm afraid there have been some developments in your case that we haven't had a chance to discuss. Yet." The blood in Sarah's veins turned to ice water. "What kind of developments?" "Unfortunately, your modification application was denied. The bank has decided to proceed with foreclosure. I received the final notice yesterday, actually. I was planning to call you Monday to discuss your options." "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. "You said the application looked good. You said the bank was willing to work with me." "Banks change their minds, Sarah. It happens more often than you'd think, especially in cases where the borrower's financial situation is precarious." Through the window, she watched Karen pull herself gracefully from the pool, water sliding off her like she was some sort of predatory mermaid. The sight made Sarah's stomach lurch. "So what? Your wife just happened to buy my house the same day. I got foreclosed on? What kind of coincidence is that?" Richard's chuckle was dry as autumn leaves. "My wife has been looking for investment properties in your neighborhood for months. She has excellent instincts for undervalued assets. When the foreclosure listing came up at auction yesterday, she moved quickly." "Yesterday?" Sarah's voice cracked. "But she said she bought it last month. She had documents." "I'm sure you misunderstood. Emotional situations can cloud our perception of details." His voice took on that same condescending tone Karen had used. "The important thing now is that we handle this transition as smoothly as possible." Sarah's mind reeled. 6 months of paperwork, of hope, of scraping together every penny for application fees and documentation. 6 months of Richard Whitfield looking her in the eye and telling her they were making progress, that the bank was willing to negotiate, that she just needed to be patient. "You lied to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did no such thing. I worked diligently on your case, but sometimes the outcome isn't what we hope for. Now, Karen has graciously agreed to allow you a reasonable amount of time to collect your belongings and find alternative housing. 30 days should be sufficient. 30 days. Sarah laughed, and it sounded broken even to her own ears. You're giving me 30 days to get out of my own house. Sarah, I understand this is difficult, but you need to face reality. The house no longer belongs to you. It belongs to my wife, fair and square. She has every legal right to occupy it immediately. Through the window, Karen was toweling off, and she looked up at the house as if she could sense Sarah watching. Their eyes met through the glass, and Karen smiled. Not the fake, saccharine smile she'd given the police, but something colder, hungrier. "This is theft," Sarah said into the phone. "It's business," Richard replied. "And if you continue to make wild accusations, it could become a legal matter. Harassment, trespassing, slander, these are serious charges, Sarah, especially against someone of my wife's standing in the community." Sarah hung up and sank into one of her kitchen chairs, the same ones she'd bought with David when they'd first moved in. Everything in this house held memories. Their first Christmas tree in the living room corner, David's last birthday cake. On this very table, the pencil marks on the doorframe tracking the height of children who'd never come. A sharp knock at the back door made her jump. Through the glass, she could see Karen's perfectly manicured silhouette. "Sarah, dear," came Karen's voice, muffled but still dripping with false sweetness. "I think we should have a little chat," against every instinct screaming at her to stay. Inside, Sarah opened the door. Karen stood there in a designer cover-up that probably cost more than Sarah's car payment, holding 2 glasses of what looked like expensive wine. "I thought we might discuss this situation like civilized adults," Karen said, holding out one of the glasses. Woman to woman, Sarah stared at the offering. "Is that my wine?" "Well, technically, it's mine now, isn't it?" Karen's smile didn't waver. "But I'm happy to share. That's the kind of person I am. Generous, understanding. I believe in karma, you know. What goes around, comes around. Funny you should mention karma." Karen stepped past Sarah into the kitchen, uninvited, and set both wine glasses on the counter. "This is a lovely kitchen. I'm thinking of remodeling, of course. These cabinets are so dated. And the appliances, well, they'll all have to go." "You can't just steal someone's house," Sarah said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Steal?" Karen's laugh was like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Oh, honey, I didn't steal anything. I bought this house at a perfectly legitimate foreclosure auction. Your husband's medical bills, your mortgage troubles, none of that is my fault. I'm simply a smart investor who recognized an opportunity you created. Your husband strung me along for months, taking my money for fees and applications he knew would never work. Richard is an excellent lawyer who worked very hard on your case. If the bank decided you weren't a good risk, that's between you and them." Karen picked up her wine glass and took a delicate sip. "Although I have to say I'm not entirely surprised. A single woman, working a blue-collar job, drowning in debt. What bank would want to take that risk?" The casual cruelty of it hit Sarah like a physical blow. "I'm a nurse. I save lives every day. I worked double shifts for months to keep up with payments. And yet here we are." Karen gestured around the kitchen with her wine glass. "Sometimes, Sarah, we have to accept that we've reached beyond our grasp. This house, this lifestyle, it was never really meant for someone like you, was it?" Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "Someone like me? Oh, don't look at me like that. I'm not being cruel, just realistic. Look at this place. You can't even afford to maintain it properly. The landscaping is overgrown, the pool chemicals are all wrong, there are scuff marks on the hardwood that you haven't bothered to fix." Karen's voice took on a tone of mock concern. "It's actually sad, watching someone try so hard to live above their means." "Get out," Sarah whispered. "I don't think so. You see, this is my house now. You're the one who needs to leave." Karen moved to the window, looking out at the pool. But I'm not heartless. I understand you have memories here. That's why I'm being generous with the 30-day notice. Most people in my position would have you out immediately. Why are you doing this? The question came out broken, desperate. Karen turned back to her, and for a moment her mask slipped completely. The expression underneath was cold and calculating, with something that looked almost like hunger. Because I can, she said simply. Because women like you think you deserve things you haven't earned. You think that working hard and being good entitles you to the same life as people like me? But it doesn't work that way, Sarah. The world isn't fair. Some people are born to win, and some people are born to serve. Sarah stared at her, finally understanding. This wasn't about the house. Not really. This was about power, about putting someone in their place, about the sick satisfaction of watching someone fall. My husband died fighting for this country, Sarah said quietly. He came home broken, and I spent everything I had trying to save him. I've worked every day since then to honor his memory and keep the home we built together. And you think that makes me weak. I think it makes you a cautionary tale. Karen finished her wine and set the glass down with a definitive clink. But don't worry, dear. I'm sure you'll find somewhere more appropriate. There are lovely apartments on the east side of town, much more suitable for someone in your position. The east side, where the factory workers lived, where the single mothers struggled to make ends meet, where people like Sarah were supposed to know their place and stay there. You know what? Sarah said, and her voice had changed, become steady as steel. You're absolutely right about one thing. What's that? Karma. What goes around comes around. Sarah moved to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder, the same one she'd used to document her husband's final wishes when he could no longer write. And I have a feeling yours is about to catch up with you. Karen's face went white as Sarah held up the device. You didn't. Every word, Sarah confirmed. Your husband lying about the foreclosure timeline, your little speech about people knowing their place, your confession about targeting me specifically. Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. I may not have your money or connections, Karen, but I'm not stupid. And I'm definitely not going down without a fight. For the first time since this nightmare began, Karen looked genuinely rattled. That recording is illegal. You can't use it. Actually, in this state, I only need one party's consent to record a conversation. Guess who gave consent? Sarah tucked the recorder back in the drawer. Besides, Sarah woke to the sound of sirens and flashing lights outside her window. She stumbled to the glass, still groggy from the first real sleep she'd had in days, and saw Richard Whitfield being led away in handcuffs from the house 3 doors down, where he'd apparently spent the night, not with his wife, she noted with grim satisfaction, but with Margaret Henderson, the city councilwoman whose husband had been conspicuously absent from last night's dramatic finale. Dorothy Chen was already there with her camera crew, having apparently camped out in her news van all night. The reporter caught Sarah's eye through the window and held up her phone, mouthing, "Call me." Sarah's phone was already ringing before she could reach for it. They moved fast. Dorothy's voice crackled with exhaustion and adrenaline. FBI raided Richard's office at 5 a.m., his house at 5:30, and picked him up at the Henderson place at 6. Turns out your recordings triggered a federal investigation that's been building for months. Federal? Sarah sank into her kitchen chair, watching the circus outside her window. Money laundering, wire fraud, racketeering, the whole 9 yards. And Sarah, it gets better. Karen isn't just Richard's wife and co-conspirator. She's been running her own side business. Through the chaos outside, Sarah could see Karen's Mercedes pulling up to the house. Even from a distance, she could tell. Something was wrong. Karen moved differently, hunched over, furtive, her usual commanding presence replaced by something that looked almost like fear. What kind of side business Identity theft. Remember how she had all those official-looking documents proving she owned your house? Turns out she's been creating fake identities for years, using them to purchase properties, take out loans, even vote in elections. The FBI found a whole operation in her basement. Computers, printers, boxes of fake IDs, and social security cards. Sarah watched Karen stumble toward the house, her designer clothes wrinkled, her makeup smeared. She looked like she'd been driving all night. Dorothy, where do you think she's been? Running, probably, but here's the thing, she can't run far, not anymore. Karen disappeared into the house, and within minutes, Sarah could hear shouting from the backyard. Not the controlled, manipulative tone Karen had used before, but something raw and desperate. I need to go, Sarah told Dorothy. I think Karen's having some kind of breakdown. She hung up and walked to her back door, her heart pounding. Through the glass, she could see Karen standing by the pool, screaming at someone on her phone. Her voice carried across the water, shrill and panicked. Don't care what they told you. The money is clean. Those properties were legitimate purchases. Karen was pacing frantically, her free hand gesturing wildly. You listen to me, Marcus. If you think you can just freeze our accounts and walk away from this, you're... She stopped mid-sentence, apparently cut off by whoever was on the other end. Her face went white, then red, then a sickly green color. What do you mean, seized? You can't seize. Another pause, longer this time. When Karen spoke again, her voice was barely audible. Everything? Sarah found herself opening the back door, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and something that might have been pity. Karen was collapsing in real time, all her confidence and cruelty, evaporating as her world came apart around her. Karen? Sarah called out softly. Karen spun around and Sarah was shocked by what she saw. The perfectly coiffed woman from yesterday was gone, replaced by someone who looked haggard, desperate, older. Her designer dress was torn at the shoulder, her hair was tangled, and her eyes had the wild look of a cornered animal. You, Karen, whispered. This is all because of you. No, Sarah said, stepping onto the patio. This is because of what you and your husband chose to do. To me, to 17 other women, to however many people you've hurt over the years. Karen laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Hurt? You think we hurt you? We gave you opportunities. We offered you chances to walk away with something instead of nothing. But you were too stupid, too stubborn, too honest, Sarah interrupted. Too unwilling to let you steal everything I'd worked for. Steal? Karen's voice rose to a shriek. We didn't steal anything. We played by the rules. We used the system exactly the way it was designed to be used. By people like you, to prey on people like me. Karen stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the exact moment when the reality of her situation finally hit home. Her shoulders sagged, her face crumpled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she looked genuinely human. They took everything, she whispered. The houses, the cars, the bank accounts, even my jewelry. 30 years of marriage, of building a life, and they took it all in one morning. Despite everything Karen had done to her, Sarah felt a flicker of sympathy. She knew what it felt like to lose everything, to have your life torn apart by forces, beyond your control. Karen, don't. Karen's voice hardened again. Don't you dare pity me. I'm not like you. I don't break. I don't give up. Then what are you going to do? Karen looked at her with something that might have been respect mixed with hatred. I'm going to tell them everything. Every detail, every transaction, every person we worked with. I'm going to burn it all down, and I'm going to take as many people with me as I can. Before Sarah could respond, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from the front of the house. Heavy footsteps, multiple voices, the distinctive crackle of police radios. Karen Whitfield, a loud voice called out. FBI, we have a warrant. Karen closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, she looked almost calm. You know what the funny thing is? She said to Sarah. I actually admired you. When you fought back yesterday, When you refuse to be intimidated. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd finally met someone worthy of the game. This isn't a game, Karen. These are people's lives. Everything is a game, Sarah. The only difference is whether you're playing to win or playing to lose. Karen walked toward the house, her head held high despite everything. I've been winning for 30 years. One loss doesn't make me a loser. The FBI agents were in the backyard now, 3 of them in dark suits and tactical vests. The lead agent, a tall woman with graying hair, held up her badge. Karen Whitfield, you're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft. Karen extended her hands without resistance, but her eyes never left Sarah's face. This isn't over, she said quietly, as the handcuffs clicked into place. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. The people we worked with, the money we moved, the systems we built, they're bigger than just me and Richard. The agent began reading Karen her rights, but Karen kept talking, her voice growing more urgent. Sarah, you need to understand, we were small fish. The real power, the real money, it goes all the way up. Judges, prosecutors, politicians, business, leaders. Do you think they're just going to let this story die? Do you think they're going to let you walk away after exposing them? Ma'am, you need to stop talking, the FBI agent warned. But Karen ignored her. Her eyes locked on Sarah's. Watch. Your back, Sarah Martinez. Watch it very carefully, because the people who are really responsible for this, the ones who created the system we used, they don't leave loose ends. The agents led Karen away, but her words lingered in the air like smoke. Sarah stood by the pool, alone for the first time in her backyard in 3 days, and tried to process what she'd just heard. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dorothy. Turn on Channel 7, now. Sarah rushed inside and flicked on the television just in time to see her own face filling the screen. It was footage from yesterday's news conference, but now it was part of a much bigger story. What began as a simple property dispute has exploded into a federal investigation involving dozens of officials and millions of dollars in fraudulent transactions, the anchor was saying. Mrs. Martinez's recordings have provided federal investigators with the evidence they needed to move forward with what sources are calling the largest corruption investigation in the city's history. The screen shifted to show Chief Henderson being led away in handcuffs, then Margaret Henderson, then a parade of faces Sarah recognized from Karen's party. One by one, the powerful people who had been laughing and drinking champagne in her backyard just 24 hours ago were taking perp walks in front of the cameras. Federal prosecutors say this is just the beginning, the anchor continued. They expect to file charges against more than 30 individuals in what they're calling Operation Clean House, an effort to root out systemic corruption in local government and the legal system. Sarah sank into her couch, overwhelmed. In the space of 3 days, she'd gone from a struggling nurse facing foreclosure to the key witness in a federal corruption investigation. The house she'd fought so hard to keep was officially hers again. The FBI had reversed the fraudulent foreclosure within hours of Richard's arrest, but somehow that victory felt smaller than it should have. Her phone rang, an unknown number with a D.C. area code. Mrs. Martinez? This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Hayes. I'm leading the federal task force investigating the Whitfield operation. I need to speak with you as soon as possible. About what? About your safety, Mrs. Martinez, and about what comes next. Sarah looked out her window at the news vans, the FBI cars, the neighbors gathering on their lawns to watch the spectacle. Karen's words echoed in